Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Black Girl Joy. I am your host, Joy. Before we get started, I want to remind you to not to describe, but to subscribe to to us at Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can find us on Facebook and you can find us on YouTube. So let's get to it. We have a super special guest today and I'm going to bring her in right now.
Hey, hi.
All right, so Katie and I worked together a long time ago. It was almost a decade ago. Can you believe that?
No,
Um,
I can't.
it was almost a decade ago. So you were a manager. We sat right next to each other, back to back, and it's so funny because I feel like me and Katie are closer now that we don't work together. We're like each other's cheerleaders on LinkedIn. That's
We
what I
are.
feel. I don't know.
I love
That's what
it.
okay. So I invited Katie to talk about owning your worth. I've looked at Katie's, I follow her, like I said, on LinkedIn, and she posts a lot about knowing your worth, starting back when she talks about having a child and re-entering the workspace. So I'm going to share a post with you that Katie shared on LinkedIn. Katie doesn't know I'm sharing this,
I
but
didn't
I'm sharing
know.
it if you didn't know. So on this, Katie, can you tell us about this post?
Sure. So, this is an experience that I had years ago after I was home with my daughter for over 2 years, and I was re-entering the workforce, and it was just such a hard time getting back into the workforce. And so I took this job unpaid for a period of time. And I made it very clear that I needed to be paid because, um, you know, being a stay-at-home mom and not being paid for that work meant that we had some financial sacrifices at that time. And we got to the point, oopsies, uh, sorry, my earbud came out. We got to the point where financially it was really important that I brought in an income. And so you know, we talked about how I would, work unpaid for a period and then I would be paid and how essential it was that that happened. And once that started, that payment started very quickly. I was asked to reduce pay, and then was basically asked to work for free in exchange for help with building my brand, which was not what I needed out of employment. And so this post was really just thinking back to that and thinking about all of the other women or men out there who are getting back into the workforce after any kind of break. But for me, it was a parental break. And, what does it mean to know your worth and know that offers like that aren't real offers that are going to benefit you? And it's scary, but you should walk away from those.
Exactly. So I just am curious, did you actually build your brand or did did she help you build your brand at all?
Not really. And, I don't know what value I was going to get out of building my brand at that time, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I was really looking to get back into the workforce and make a difference with the work that I was doing, but I wasn't looking to build my own business at the time, right? And so it really just felt like just like throwing things at the wall and see what stuck to try to
Mhm.
get me to stay and do work as an expert without being properly compensated.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So now that you look back on that, what brought you to the place to say, okay, I know my value. This is my value. Was that the catalyst or was it a series of events that was like, okay, no longer?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, I think like many others, I struggle with imposter syndrome, right? I'm a mom of two. I have had many different roles at different companies, and still I have this feeling of like, oh gosh, am I really this person?
Mhm.
Like, am I is my value what I believe it is? And the answer is yes, but I have to coach myself a little bit with that. And so it's been this journey, and I think it starts with Home Depot where you and I
Mhm.
met, and there I started out, and at the time I was one of the youngest people on the floor, as were you, right? And so that was really interesting to be a part of this huge department and be, you know, on the younger side of things and really stepping into this new field. Out of teaching, I went into something called instructional design, which is like corporate education. And so I was like, oh gosh, am I qualified for this? Right. And so I think working with people and then just trying it out, like, you know, throw me into the deep end and see if I swim. And I think when I swim, that's when I realized, oh, I can add value here. Right. And so, you know, it's experiences like that, you know, stepping into Home Depot University, that role. That was one that I had just become a new mom. I think my son was 6 months old when I applied for that job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I remember my manager encouraging me to apply, and I needed to be convinced because I was like, oh gosh, like I'm a new mom, can I handle this? And he was like, yes, you can. Apply for it. And so you know, that was a fantastic experience, and I loved that job. That will always be one of my most favorite roles that I've ever had, working with you and working with the team. And so sorry,
it's okay,
y'all, I'm having trouble with my earbuds today. Okay. And so you know, I learned my worth that way. But I think that your value really comes with your whole self. So like when we think about what is our value, I think especially in the United States, we think about what value do I add to the workforce, right? But I'm also a mother, so I add value to my children's lives. I'm a wife. I add value to my husband's life. I have friends, right? I have a community. And so I think having a more well-balanced idea of what value is has been an important journey for me as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because especially in the United States, the value is on money and position and title. And so I've always struggled with that. I struggle with that at any corporate place I've worked at, because I always felt like the expectation was to treat people and to value people in the workforce based on what their position was and what their income was. And that's probably one of the main reasons like I struggle in corporate settings, because I believe your value is just innate. Like, you're a human being, so you have value to me regardless. And I think it's harder because I will see value in others before I see value in the things that I do. So that imposter syndrome and like, am I doing enough? Am I contributing enough? Am I contributing enough at work? Am I contributing enough in the community? And honestly, work is kind of weird. Like, work to me is on the lower end, because I feel like I contribute at work. I feel like I work hard and I try to do my best, and I'm very strict with myself about having a good product at work. But when it comes to like community and home, I'm like, could I do more? Could I do more with my son? Can I do more here? Am I fulfilling my purpose and really like exhibiting my value?
Yeah.
Outside
Oh gosh.
of the office.
Yeah. It's that piece around like you could tell other people what their value is all day, and then you put a lot of pressure on yourself, like, oh, what more can I do? Oh, I feel that in my soul. I very similarly am always just like, what more can I do, especially with the world events that are going on too. It's like, I want to change so many things for the better, and it's like, you know, what can I do for those things as well? So it sounds like you have a lot of confidence in your value at work, right? Like that's very clear and measurable, but in those other areas, maybe it's a little bit more gray, or you feel like you'd like to have more focus there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because at work, you get instant feedback, right? If you volunteer for the community, you get some feedback, maybe sometimes depending on what you do. And I also do stuff a lot of times behind the scenes. So if I donate, or if I, like, let's say, give away something, or do, it's a lot of times I don't even promote it because I'm not doing it for the promotion of it. But you don't get that feedback like you do at work. Like, you're gonna get fired, you're gonna get a raise, you know, you're gonna be told if you messed up, if the client's not happy. It's instant feedback at work, but you don't really get that at home. Like, my son's not running up to me saying, "Oh, you're such a good mom." Like, at 15, he's not doing that. It's more like, you're driving me crazy. So you don't have that same feedback loop. So it kind of feeds into any insecurities that I may have around those.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at work, like your compensation is a number, or
Mhm.
you know, your level is a number, and you can point to that and you can be like, oh, this is where I am, or this is
Yeah,
my title, right?
your
Yeah,
exceeds expectations, like, you have a little
right.
rating.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard as a mom, especially when like, yeah, your kids, I mean, sometimes you're doing a fantastic job and you're just getting yelled at by your kids, right? Like sometimes you are just straight up getting yelled at. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, how well am I doing here? I'm not getting that feedback that I need. But what I tend to do is I just look at like, how are they as overall humans? Like, how are
Mhm,
they interacting with others? Are they kind with others? Are they
mhm.
understanding? Are they accepting of everyone? Right. Like, and when I can see them out in the world doing those things, what I like to do is I take note of it and I really like soak in those
Mhm.
moments. And I'm like, there's my that's my feedback, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm doing a good job.
Or
But
when
it
other
doesn't,
parents or other adults tell you about your child, like, "Oh, they're such a nice kid."
yes.
Yeah.
It's so good. I think a turning point for me. So, you were there for this when I was at the Home Depot when my son was 2. I was diagnosed with
Mhm.
thyroid cancer, and so, luckily for me, it was easily curable with surgery. And a few things happened during that time. So, one is the team rallied around me in like an incredibly surprising way. And I have pictures of you and I and the whole team. And what they
Oh,
did was they threw me like a cancer party, which it was amazing. It was like knock cancer out. And so they like even set up a boxing ring. Do you remember that with like the
oh,
swings?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And like
James
the
set up the
boxing gloves.
boxing ring, we had the
Yes.
gloves, we had a mixtape.
It was amazing. I love that mixtape, and I still talk to my kids about it. And so, like, the way that community rallied around me made me realize that actually the most valuable thing that I can do in any environment is make people's lives better, you know,
Yeah.
day to day, but also during times of crisis because
Mhm.
of the way that you all lifted me up during that time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I realized is time is finite. Like, we all know it, right?
Mhm.
We know it, but it was just in my face in a way that it hadn't been before. And so, you know, when I think about my time and my moments, and then I think about what's my value, it really shifted things for me to
Mhm.
say, hey, like any time that I spend on anything is highly valuable.
Yeah.
Because these are my precious moments that I'm giving to something else. And
Mhm.
that was a turning point for me as well, where when that happened, I just felt like, okay, I really need to make sure um, I'm doing things that make a positive impact, but also I'm doing things in a way where I'm valued appropriately, if that makes sense.
No, that does, but it brings up another point for me. You talked about being offered, like, help with a brand in exchange for your labor, right? And what I'm wondering is, how does knowing your value impact your ability to set boundaries?
Oh, I think this is such an important question in all areas of life, right? Like, it's not just employment, but it's also like, what about the toxic people in your life? What about the people who are family or friends, right?
Mhm.
Who you have to set those boundaries with. It's really important. So I think like no matter how much imposter syndrome you have to know like what are your goals in life? What are you trying to give back to the world? And then like what what should be mirrored onto what you accept as
Mhm.
well, right? And so I think what was really important with that experience was I just felt very disrespected, right? Like it was, I made it very clear that my family financially depended on this, and just the fact that the assumption even was that I could accept something like that in lieu of payment was honestly heartbreaking. It was actually a heartbreaking experience for
Yeah.
me, that whole thing. Um, and just the fact that it like came from a fellow woman was also difficult, right? I think sometimes like as a woman, I think we have to fight twice as hard to get anywhere we want to get in the workplace. And when we see our fellow women not holding us up or not
Yeah.
lifting us up or not advocating for each other, that's very difficult. And even though I know it happens because I've experienced it, I'm sure you've experienced it as
Yeah.
well. It's heartbreaking every time, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's just knowing that you shouldn't accept that into your life, right? Like that's a boundary that you have to set and say, like, no, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a professional, right? At that time, like I have a master's degree, I have work experience. You know that I need to be paid. I can't not work. It's just not a viable option. And so I think it's having the strength to just know like all of those things mean that there's something else around the corner is really important, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to know there's something else that's going to be around the corner that's going to be better than this thing that in your gut, like you know it doesn't feel right, and you need to just advocate for yourself and then go find that thing that's going to be what you need it to be and allow you to give back the way you want to.
Yeah. So when you talk about that, it also brings up fear, right? So you can have like the sense of value, but you also have to be able to combat that fear that nothing else is around the corner, especially these days. Like you can look for a job and there's a lot of jobs out there, but there's also a lot of people out there looking for jobs. Or you can be in a relationship and you can feel like, well, this is really good, but it's really not what I want, right? This is a really nice person, and you'll feel like it's, oh gosh, the dating world in Atlanta. You will feel like there's nothing else out there. There's nothing out there in the dating world. But it comes up, like I said, it comes up in multiple facets where it's like, okay, I'm doing this journey, I'm learning my value, I'm accepting my value, I'm owning my value. But do I really, like, I see it, but am I acting upon it? Am I acting like I know my value? I understand I'm a mom. I understand I am resilient based on my past. I'm intelligent. I can problem solve. But am I really acting in line with my value and also purpose?
Yeah. Um, and like, is that a question that you ask once, or do you have to ask yourself that over and over and over again? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think, especially in coaching, you'll see like, what is my purpose and what is my long-term vision? And it's so overwhelming, right? It's big. When you think about your value, it feels big. Like it can't be little. You don't want it to be little. Like it's big and it's really all encompassing. And I don't even know if it can be described completely in words. You're just valuable, right? But sometimes we have to break those things out, and we think about it over and over and over, and we're faced with it over and over. It's not a one-time deal, and we're like, nope, we know our value, we're done. No, sometimes you're gonna be pushed, and when you're pushed,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to go back to that. You're gonna have to go back to that statement. You may redefine it, you may tweak it along the way, but it's never a stopping point.
Right. And I think, like sometimes you have to challenge yourself to
Mm-hmm.
say, like, I have to ask this question of myself again, and now I have to decide on how to act on it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you're just put into situations, right? It like catches you off guard and you're like, oh gosh, okay, somebody has challenged my value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or, something has come up and something's happened, and now I feel like I need to advocate for myself. And you have to check in with yourself every time that happens. Um, and I think what's important is just to know, like, just that checking in and the taking the steps forward is a big win, even if the outcome isn't exactly what you want it to be, right? Like you can do all the right things and have an outcome that's not exactly where you wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could even just not land for you well at all. And that's okay, because you have the strength to pick yourself up and move forward in a way that will be beneficial to you. Um, but that's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
there is that fear of like, oh, can I pick myself up if I fall in a personal relationship or with work, right? Like what does that look like?
Yeah. And also, will I be accepted? Will people accept me if I act, if I express my value? Will they accept me? A big thing, especially in like the Black community, Black women, and maybe outside of that, right, is I don't want to seem stuck up. I don't want to seem arrogant. And it's often used in it like equally as confident, right? So I'm like, no, you can be confident and not be like arrogant and a jerk or whatever that is, right? Or stuck up, as they say. And I think that's also hard to navigate, because a lot of times we've been told if we say something good about ourselves, oh, you think you're all that. That's one thing. Like, why are you bragging on yourself? I've had sessions where people are like, I don't want to brag. I don't want to brag. It's like, it's okay. You did good. You can say it. You can express it. You can brag. Bragging is not a bad thing, right? Um, so I think that also interferes with us expressing our value because we don't want to come off a certain way. And we look at women in the workplace, it's like we feel like we need to be humble, which is good, but we shrink ourselves a lot in the workplace and in the outside world because we don't want to come off a certain way.
Yeah, and meanwhile, men are talking about their accomplishments all the time, right? They're talking about them, they're writing about them, they're very boisterous about all of it, and so that gets recognized
Yeah.
before women's accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this really great idea about like the level of work that you're doing. Like, are you taking a project from like Z to A, or are you taking a project, or no, it was like from Z to like D, or are you taking a project from like B to A, right? Like the first one, you're taking the project farther, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually doing more work.
Mm-hmm.
But from like B to A, now you're up leveling a project so it's shiny and beautiful and perfect, and people celebrate that. And men tend to do those projects more, and women tend to do the ones that have the larger gap, which was really interesting. Right. So like it just fits in with all of that, like, can I brag about myself? What kind of work am I signing myself up to do? Right? Like, what does my self-talk look like?
Yeah.
But I guess my question to you is like, what do you recommend when people feel like, especially women and Black women, are feeling like I can't talk about my accomplishments, right? Like, how do you help them through that? Is there a difference in the way they talk about it in different settings, like to themselves versus to others? Like, how do you advise people on that?
So what I find is they talk the same way to themselves as they do to others. And sometimes it also builds a loop of resentment, right? Because we're not going to express our accomplishments, but we can sometimes become annoyed when it's not expressed by others, and not constantly expressed by others, but when it's not acknowledged at all. And so we're not expressing our accomplishments, which means sometimes we're not getting as big of a raise as we need to. We're not getting the level we need to. Like, one of my biggest regrets at Home Depot is that I was managing my department. So before you came, there was a manager, and I had this big gap, right? Where I was running the show. Like, I was running the show. The department went from, like, I don't know. In my eyes, that's one of my biggest accomplishments, right? So to me, it went from 20 to like 85, 95. And it was totally different from when I walked in the door within a matter of months, just of me doing it by myself. And I really look back on that experience and say, I didn't advocate for myself. I didn't say, hey, MT, right? Hey, MT, like, I'm doing all of this. Can I be the manager of this department? Should I get a raise? And to the point where she told me, they're talking about what you're doing on the CEO jet. And it came back to me. I'm like, oh, wow. But to me, I value the work I did a lot. And I value the impact I had a lot. I didn't value the like position title or all the like politics around it, right? And so I didn't advocate for myself. And I think for us, it's really coming to that realization of, where does this come from? Why can't we talk about our accomplishments? Where did we get this from? And a lot of times when we dig down into what we heard over and over and over as kids, right? It's just what we heard. We heard, oh, you think you're smart. Or if you say something smart, like, you're smart, eh? Yeah. My sister has a saying. She's like, I'd rather be a smart A than a dumb one. But you hear those messages and they become ingrained in you. So we do exercises where it's like, okay, I want you to brag on something every single day. And I want you to feel good about it. I want you to acknowledge your accomplishment. I want you to celebrate yourself at the end of the week. And we do those exercises until I've even had a list of verbs, right? Or descriptors. like I am strong. Like, what did I exhibit this week? And we would literally sit down and be like, oh, I was strong this week. I was resilient this week. I was resourceful. And we would go through and check off word for word. And I'm like, oh, and they would start off like I wasn't anything this week. And I'm like, okay, let's just go. Like, let's just go. What were you? Were you strong? Oh yeah, I did that extra hard workout this week. You know, did you problem solve this week? And it's just like, oh, and so you literally have to pry it out to recognize, like, what am I doing that adds value for others and for myself?
Yeah. And if we as adults struggle with that, how are we teaching our children to speak to themselves, right? So, like, that work that you're doing with others and that we can
Mm-hmm.
all do with ourselves is so important, because if we can master that, then we can teach our children to do
Exactly.
that. And then hopefully they don't have to overcome this when they're
Mm-hmm.
older, right? Like we tend to struggle with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And you have to be very intentional. I'm trying. I'm trying as a parent to be very intentional, but you do, and it has to be a practice. And I think each generation gets a little better about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I do too. Um, how do you advise people, women especially, to advocate for making sure they're compensated appropriately at jobs, right? Like at the point of interview, and then once they're in role, do you talk to folks about that? It's something that I'm pretty passionate about, and I've worked very hard at, but still don't even feel like I've fully cracked, right? Like, how do you do that with finesse and confidence? And so I would love to just hear like what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've worked with an array of clients on like the interview process and not so much the salary negotiation. But my main message to women is like, own your worth. Look up the job. If you need to look up the job on Glassdoor and
Yep.
figure out the pay range and then bring yourself up because you have all these years of experience and you do all of this stuff, then do that. Know your worth. Don't short sell yourself. And it's interesting when I've heard people even say, well, I'm going to downplay, I'm going to downplay my talents. Like, no, you don't. You don't have to downplay your
No,
talents.
yeah.
No, upsell yourself. And I'll never forget my interview at Home Depot with MT. She literally told me, she said, I know that when men step in the room, they often oversell themselves and women often short sell themselves of what they did. And I'm like, be aware of that. I want you to list your accomplishments like you do when you're upset. Like when your manager makes you mad and
Mhm.
you say, you know what, I do this, I do this, I do this. What would they do without me? Like, I want you to like do that angry, like you're doing an angry tweet. And I want
Yeah.
you to like think about your accomplishments in that light, because that's more realistic than when we're shrinking ourselves.
Oh, that's such great advice. I love that, right? And I think you could apply that to when you build your resume
Hmm.
too, right? When you're in a job interview. Yeah, I think that's so important. Um, and one of the things that I really loved about entering my current role,
Hmm.
um, is when I moved to this company, I interviewed them basically as much as they interviewed me, right?
Yeah.
So I pushed for, a salary that felt really good, and they offered it, and it was wonderful. Um, but I also talked to them about what it is to be a mother and
Hmm.
work at a startup. And I really needed to vet them to make sure that I could be the kind of mother that I would feel proud about, right? Like that piece of me, that part of my entire value system. And it was really great. I got to speak to another parent. Like, I talked to him about my needs. I asked him how he was able to balance. And only then did I feel comfortable moving into a new company to make sure that, from a holistic and balanced perspective, right? Like, I felt good about my compensation. I felt good about the value that they were placing on my skills, but I also felt that I wouldn't have to um, I wouldn't have to give up the type of mother that I aspire to be, essentially.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I actually went through the same, not the same process, but a similar process when I came to my current job. So during the interview process, I work for a very, very small company. It's three people, 3 people.
Wow. Okay.
So I've worked here for about 7 years, and I know like who I work for. I work directly for the owners, right? So it's just it's just us. And I knew she is so dedicated and so good at what she does, and she wants to satisfy her clients to like at no cost. And one of the conversations we had was my son was a lot younger. He was in elementary school. I was like, okay, like I have to do basketball practice, and I have to feed, and I have to, and she was a mother. And I think that's been great because we're all mothers.
Yeah.
And so we get it. And it's been such a great experience. And that's one thing I do push my clients on is to ask for what you need. Like talk about what you need and don't be shy about it. So for me, it was, I need time, with my kid. I have to help with homework. I'm a single mom. I have to do it all. So,
Yeah.
so at the same time, like I will work and I'll give you my all. And if it comes where there's a time of year where I have to work a lot of hours, right? And so I know that and I'm prepared for it. I do it every year. But it's very important for me to be able to balance. And I think it's so important to go into those interviews and conversations asking for what you need, because I always see myself like I'm a business just like you're a business. And so you're a business, you're a value, you're a resource to them and they're a resource to you. So it should be a reciprocal relationship.
I totally agree. And like, I also had the thought, like, ask for what you need. And I would take it one step further and say, tell them what you
Yeah,
need.
I like that.
And like, this is it. Like, this is non-negotiable. This is what it is for me to work for you and for you to get like the talent that I bring to the table and the collaboration. And then if they take it, then that's awesome. And if they don't, then that means that wasn't the right place for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that goes not only for money and time, but also culture.
Yeah.
Culture is really big for me. And I think I've landed in a place that is very, very supportive, and that is like more supportive than I would have ever imagined. But sometimes, like we've heard people say, or I have, it's like, well, I'll stick with the devil I do know. You don't have to stick with the devil. Like, I don't think that sounds good. And if it's a different devil, I think they're both just the devil. So, you don't have to do that. And it can be like that fear, right? Knowing your value, but then also understanding how that fear impacts your mindset, where it's like, well, I'm not going to leave, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm comfortable with this uncomfortableness, I guess. But being able to see like there's different options. And I think for me, like I've been able to navigate and move careers till I found somewhere that was super supportive. I mean, my mom was sick. I was like in my hometown all the time. I could work from there. There was no issues with that. And you just don't know, like some places will not do that.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you landed someplace that like the culture is amazing and supportive and you feel really good about being there every day. I think that's so important as well. And I love that you share like your career journey to get there, right? Like it sounds like it took a few different tries to find the place where you felt really comfortable. And I think that's to be celebrated, right?
Yeah, I celebrate it. And it's so funny when I speak about my mom. When I worked at RaceTrac before Home Depot. And so when I worked at RaceTrac, they were super good. Like they let me go to school. I would have to leave and come back during the day and all of this stuff. So they were super flexible with me. They weren't quite the place where I was going to be able to do what I needed to do, right?
Yeah.
Or get where I needed to get in life. But great company, especially starting off a really good company. But I remember telling my mom, like, I'm going to leave. And my mom is old school. And so I was like, I'm going to go take this job at the Home Depot. Now, Home Depot is huge, right? She's like, you better not go to that job. You better not leave. And she was like so hesitant. She's like, you better not leave that good job. You have benefits and flexibility. I was like, yeah, I also have rent. So I'm going to go over. And so I left there. I went to Home Depot and my mom was like, okay. And then I left there and I went to Coach. She's like, okay. And then I landed here and she was like, no, you better not leave that job. It was back to that because it's like she could tell the difference in me when I was in a different type of environment. Not that like Home Depot was really fun. It's actually one of my most favorite positions that I've ever had in corporate. It's just for me, corporate was the higher, and I think it's changing now, but the hierarchy and all of that stuff was it was kind of difficult, challenging for me.
Yeah. Well, and it's so I love hearing like your mom saw it reflected, right? Like it's almost like she saw what was happening to you and was able to reflect it back. So for
Hmm.
you to say like, oh gosh, this is like significantly different in a really
Hmm.
positive way. Um, but also, right, like men change their jobs every 2 years. Living in Silicon Valley, that was like the norm, right? Almost like every 2 years, people would go to a different company.
Hmm.
I love the idea of being at a company long term, right? Like
Hmm.
I spent 5 years at the Home Depot, and I really enjoy where I work now, and so like I really like that. And what you did, switching jobs, also can strategically work out very well for women, right?
Hmm.
Because you get the most significant bump when you
Yep.
move to a new job versus staying in one job and waiting for the raises.
Hmm.
So even though it's scary, I think what you did was really brave and probably very beneficial in many ways, especially finding right the place that you've landed that you want to
Exactly.
stay. But the journey was probably really great for you as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so the difference between like old school mom and me is that she was able to work at a job for like 30 years. You
Yeah.
know, she was married. She just had a different lifestyle than I
Yep.
have. Where for me, and we all see the housing rates and the rent rates skyrocketing. It was like I have to move because the 2-3% is not getting me what I need. My rent is going up 2-3%. So I'm falling short. So I think it actually worked out really well. And then I ended up working from home, which saved me a ton of gas and time. So,
That's amazing. And as a single mom, like I think that you're amazing. I think all single parents are just like incredible. I can't imagine like all that you go through as being the only breadwinner and the sole parent,
mhm,
and it's just it's a lot, right? So like it's a ton of responsibility
mhm,
and probably angst that's added on to your
mhm.
employment, because you don't have a second person who can contribute. So I just think like all of that, your story is so inspiring and you're just such a strong
Oh,
person. And I've felt that about you, for many, many years. Ever since I've known you, I
thank
just see you as a very
you,
strong and successful, amazing person. Yeah.
Katie. Oh, Katie's
And
like
a
my
great
mentor.
mom. And a great mom.
I try. I try. But yeah, and I think too, like your story, it connects with I think all moms, right? Because you get nervous. Like you're out. Let's say you're pregnant and you're out for that time. You get nervous about coming back and how people will receive you. And I have definitely had rude comments, I'll say it, in the workplace about my motherhood, especially because I'm a young mother. And
Yeah.
so that was one of the things to make me um, kind of see my value in a different light and say, no, you're not gonna comment on my motherhood. You grown man talking to intern is inappropriate for you to do that. But knowing like, okay, this is also a struggle when you go into the workplace. Say, I'm a single mom. They instantly kind of see you as, oh, you're gonna want a lot of days off. You're gonna da 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 da. You're
Yeah.
not gonna be focused. And it's like, no, I'm a whole human being. And I think the pandemic did an amazing job. It was horrible, but it did an amazing job at making people recognize the value of a whole human being and not
Yeah.
just an employee. You had the kids running back and forth, and you really saw like this person is balancing a lot of things. You're caretaking for your parents or your older
Yep.
family members. And so I think the one good thing in the corporate world and work world that came out of the pandemic was the recognition that we are whole human beings. We have feelings, we have families, and there's just more to us than making money for the
Oh,
company.
absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what a crazy what it's been like almost 3 years now. It's been right. Wild to like work and parent during this time and the way that
Mhm.
it's changed things. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Like, I had when I was pregnant with my first, I had somebody be like, "Oh, that wasn't planned, right?" And I was like, yes, it was. Actually, it was planned, but it's none of your business, right? Like, it's unbelievable. And then, like later, I had someone just blatantly be like, oh, well, I can work more hours than you because you're a mom. And I was like, actually, I did work just as many hours that you did, but I started to get burnt out. So I added boundaries into my life and I won't go back. Right. Not that like he deserved any kind of an explanation like that. But it's like, this is where like the knowing your value based on people challenging your value comes in, right? Like when people start to challenge your value in any of these domains, right? Like I saw a mama bear come out in you when you were just describing that story of like, being an intern and having a man question, your motherhood.
Oh, I was the full time.
You don't even do that.
I was the full-time employee. They were commenting to the interns that I was actually helping and training. And
no, they were not.
Yes.
Roselle, stop it.
I'm not lying.
Y'all, that makes this so much worse. Did you hear I don't know if anyone made the assumption that I had made initially, but that's I mean,
it was bad.
It's all bad.
And and I don't know if you experience this, Katie, but I have a thing with like leadership and management, right? I respect you, but I don't worship you. So I was like, okay, so you're asking people to calculate the age I had my child? That is odd and weird. It's just, and it was actually inaccurate what they calculated. And so it was very offensive. And so I made it known in a very aggressive, passive aggressive way. But I was really young when that happened. I probably would address it more directly. But you do face those things. And the funny part is that someone can say they work more hours, but did you actually do more work? Hours doesn't determine how much work you do. That's how much time you sat on a computer most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. If you can do your work incredibly efficiently, right, and you're very, very good at it, you can get it done in less time, then that's somebody being just as productive as putting in 80
and the quality
of
the work could be totally different. So you guys don't value your work on the time you spend on it. That is a trick to get you to work a lot of hours.
I agree. And I think like these challenges come no matter how old you are, right? Like even like going back into the workforce, I couldn't believe it. I was in an interview with a man and a woman, and they asked me if my husband approved of me going back to work after being home with my kids. And just like them asking that question meant that I wasn't going to move forward with the company, right? Like it's actually illegal for anybody to ask anything like that, right? So but B, like just how disrespectful, right? I felt like I had gotten into a time machine and gone back in time, and I was just like, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, is my worth the skills and talent and passion that I bring to your organization, or is it whether or not my husband approves of my returning to the workforce, right?
It's really strange because we pretend as a society that we're past these things, and it's still there.
No. Yeah.
We pretend we're like women's rights. Yeah. Or the woman is now the CEO, the first female CEO. And we're not there. We're not there by a long shot.
Right. And it's all firsts, right? Like it's not established by any means. And this can come from all directions, right? Like it can come from a manager. It can come from somebody that reports to you. It can come from an intern. It can come, right? Like it can come from another woman. Like all of this, there's no one face to discrimination, right? When it comes to being a woman in the workforce, and like it's times that by a million, right? I'm sure, for being a Black woman in the workforce. I can't speak to it personally, but would love your thoughts on that, right? Like it must be so much harder for Black women in the workforce.
Yeah, I think so. You have so many stereotypes, and it was interesting. I was in a workshop and we were talking about like being assertive, right? So it's leadership workshop, and it's like, what do you do to be a better leader? Do you address issues or do you avoid the issues? Like, where do you fall, or do you try to maintain peace? What's the other one? So it's like, where do you fall on this line? And what it brought up for like Black women, or me personally, is if you try to address issues, like how do you address issues without being the aggressive one? And that happens to
Yeah.
women regardless, right? But being aggressive, but for Black women, it's like being the angry Black woman. How do you
Yeah.
fit in into this space where we weren't really meant to be? And we're kind of, we're coming in. But you face all of those stereotypes,
Yeah.
and you're this, you're that. Either you're lazy or you're aggressive or you got a lot of kids, I guess, at a young age. I don't know.
Interesting. And you have to fight against all of that
To prove yourself. So it's
constantly.
like we
Yeah.
know when we go into the workplace, if we want to succeed, we're going to have to work 10 times as hard as anyone else to prove ourselves. We're going to have to be on point all the time. And for me, I'm like, no, I'm a human. Like, I'm a human. I like to have high quality work, but I'm not going to constantly try to prove myself and do all this stuff. And that's what we're coming to the realization of is
Yeah.
like, no, we belong here just as much as the other person. We see our value. You're not doing us a favor by being here. We're actually doing you a favor by offering you our talents. And then it's reciprocated, right? But you're not doing us a favor for allowing us in this space.
Yeah. And anybody who, like, how do you respond to people who make you feel like you're doing them a favor?
Oh, it depends on the person.
Yeah.
For me, I think as I get older,
Yeah.
I can be more straightforward,
Mhm.
right? I don't have the time. I don't have the patience. I'm old. I'm tired, and I'm old. So for me, it's just, it's direct. I've had managers who, geesh, like I've had really bad, well, I haven't had a lot of bad managers, not you, but
Well, I'm glad.
not you, but I've had managers who literally like cussed out the team and was like, you need to find somewhere effing to go, or I need to find somewhere to effing go. And so I had to address that with leadership. But I think now that I'm older, I would be like, well, which one of us? Like, let's figure it out. Let's work it out together, because you just I think people are tired. And I think with all of the stuff we went through in the last 3 to 4 years with
Yeah.
George Floyd, with the
Yeah.
pandemic, and all of the posts about how everyone's now like embracing racial equality and diversity and inclusion. Now we're like, we want to see you put your money and your actions where your mouth is. If you're going to post stuff on social media, if you're going to put out like the note about what you're going to do and your resolutions, like we want to see. And I think that gave us a whole new type of boldness to say, okay, are you doing it or not? Because before you weren't acknowledging it.
Yeah.
And so we just can, okay, we're just here. But now it's like, are you doing it or not? You say I belong here, then I belong here. And so I think we're in a different space work-wise as far as the relationship between corporate America and Black women, minorities, women, LGBTQ, like all of that. I think we're in a totally different space because of all of the diversity work that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, right? And like, I mean, I feel old and tired as well, right? But like we shouldn't have to feel old and tired to feel like we can stand up for what we need to be included properly as whole people, right? So I just and I love what you're saying about like, companies starting to actually acknowledge these things and say they stand for these things. Okay, that's step one, but now you get to ask for them to actually take action, right? So like, okay, great. Now what does that look like? And that was very inspiring for me to hear. It gives me hope that these companies will hear that and then say, okay, now I'm going to take action. And then maybe as a society, we can start to shift in a more positive direction.
Exactly. And I agree. I think now we're also holding them to the fire.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah.
All right.
Important.
Katie, I have taken so much of your time. We went over.
Thank you for having me. I have loved our conversation.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. So, what would you tell someone who like they're not clear on their value? What would you tell them?
I really like journaling and vision boards. So anytime I'm feeling unclear about even just my value, but even like what are my priorities, I'll write it all out, right? And then I'll, once I write it all out, I'll think about like, okay, what does this mean about my value, the way that I contribute, right? But also like what I receive from others. And I'm very intentional about that. So I think that's step one. It's like just identifying what are your goals, what do you see your value as, and maybe what do you want it to be, like that you don't see now but is aspirational. And then I would say, like in the moment, if you're looking at a new role or you're in a current role and you're questioning your compensation, right? Like that's just what you were saying, like go on Glassdoor, look at what your peers are making, right? And don't just look at what other women are making, look at what men are making, right? Like that's where you should be. And then ask to be at parity with those folks. So like that's the financial value piece, but I think that in all other aspects of life, it's just like understanding what your value is and then telling people what you expect from them, but also giving them the same respect, right? Like reciprocal respect, and making sure that you are telling people that you understand their value and showing people that you understand their value in your actions. Does that answer your question? It's a little bit philosophical and not super concrete, but yeah.
I like it. All right, Katie. So thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed our conversation. If you have anything to come back and say, you're welcome back at any time. And we should do like a Zoom. We should do like a Zoom happy hour or something one day.
Yes, please. I would love that. That would
We
be
gotta
so
set
fun.
it up. I'm gonna message you. All right, so everyone, we're about to wrap up. We love to hear your comments. So feel free to comment and I will definitely respond to everything I see. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe on almost every platform you can think of or that I got to. So YouTube, Facebook. I'm looking to see where else. I'm on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Joy Rizal Butts. You can find me there, or Active Potential Coaching. If you're looking for a coach, I'm available. But until next week, we'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye, everyone.